Well, that's interesting. The feed didn't play. It kept saying the feed is not playing. Boy, they talk about a technical problem. I don't know what to do. Anyway, we're live now on the IBM TV network. I'd like to welcome everybody to Economics Monday. I'm Nick Pallavito, your host. I'm with Jay Glasgow with the Private Eye Show. Professor Dan Worthington, who's one of our people on Lawyer's Den and also Media Monday, and also we'll bring in Peter Bennett, who is on, he's on economics.
Investing with Sasha.
Yeah, investing with Sasha, which we could discuss because I just took my bath on FireEye. I don't know if you got into that firestorm yet.
No, I did not go to FireEye. I just concerned that there were so many security firms, so I didn't go with that one.
Well, it was even worse than that. Okay, so what happened? What happened with FireEye? I'm going to just brief you, counselor. Okay, so I'm looking for a securities firm to invest in. FireEye was mentioned by Joe Biden, has a good track record, trading around $22 a share. So the thing is, I go, okay, I'll go ahead and invest in FireEye. All right. And then what happened was, just as cybersecurity becomes a big thing economically, Peter, the CEO of the company announced that he's going to sell his half the company.
Oh no.
Okay, no, and the name FireEye, and rebrand it to his name, which is Mandiant.
Oh,
okay,
no.
And he sold it for a good number, $1.2 billion. Here's what Wall Street reacted to that sale: down 14%. Horrible 14. Idea.
Well, you did well with Hertz, so
right. I did well with Hertz, right? I did better with Hertz than I did on FireEye.
And everything else on modern investing with Sasha. So we've
everything else. I'm winners all the way around on modern investing. Winners all the way around. I have no losers. Okay, I made money on everything. Everything that Sasha touched turns to gold. This was my recommendation.
And don't forget about me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and actually, yeah.
I don't have any losers either.
Yeah, MPLX has been good. Everything's good except FireEye. And the real problem I had with FireEye is how could anyone know, unless you had inside information, that the CEO is about to unload half of his company for the worst asset you could possibly get today, which is cash.
That's why we diversify, because there's always things you can't know. There are companies that I go into and I dig and I dig and I dig. They look great, but I go, why does the market not like it or whatever? And so you have to calculate the risk. That's the only way to do it.
Yeah, well, I calculated the risk. Hey, Sasha, and I got my eye stuck by FireEye. Okay, and the thing is,
fire in your eye.
Does anybody know if Joe Biden was selling short?
I don't know. See, Joe, he probably was selling short. He may have had inside information. The guy's going to dump half the company. And I'm sitting here going like, wait a minute, I invested in a cybersecurity company. I didn't invest in a company that decided where half of it we're not going to be in anymore. And I go, see, as an investor, you just don't have any choice. You just write out the whatever. And anyway, Wall Street didn't like it. Yeah.
But what's interesting is that they decided to sell their asset the very next day that you purchase shares. So let's say you purchase shares on Tuesday, and Wednesday then they selling all these assets. This is the most spectacular way of separating people with their money. To do very swift and awesome.
Yeah, well, they separated me from some of my money. I was going like, okay, thank you, FireEye. You stuck it in my eye. We have Ben Banerjee from the Swiss Impact Investment Association. Ben, how are you doing?
Good.
It looks like good. Yeah, it looks like you've got a couple activists on the board at Exxon. And when you were doing that, I was about to dump my Exxon stock. I was going like, wait a minute, we're going to manage our company for things other than pure capitalistic greed. I was not really too favored, especially when you're an investor. But then Exxon stock went up. And I'm going like, what gives here? Why is it that impact investing brings stocks up?
It is a long-term planning. Everywhere it's a long-term, because if you look at the performance of impact investment funds, even including that of Al Gore, he has outperformed nearly every hedge fund. So most of these funds are performing extremely good. And that's why also in the activist nature that if you can control and turn some of the companies, it is for the good. I don't know if you listened to Mark Carney's speech last week. where he also mentioned that every company which is going to act correctly now on the matter of climate change will not only create profit, but will also create value for its shareholders and has a future. And the companies which won't will stay behind with massive amount of stranded assets.
Right.
And I think Exxon and these are following that way. If they don't change their way, they will be ending up with a massive amount of stranded assets.
Okay.
So,
All right. Well, the thing is, I didn't mind as long as the stock keeps going up. I don't really care. Now, Jay, since you're with Private Eye, you heard the pitch from the Binge TV network, and we want your data, by the way. Okay. What are your thoughts about that? It seems to be even the telecom industry is saying, hey, we'll give you a free cell phone as long as we get your data. It seems to me the company, corporate America is really interested in grabbing your data no matter what. What's your thoughts on that? What's Private Eye thoughts?
Well, the numbers can't be contested. You have, when we did a survey off the record of CFOs around the world, we found that 62% of them are already monetizing data. The rest are feeling huge pressure to do so. If your company is not monetizing data in some way, you're like pushing a square ball uphill. You're not going to be as successful as your competitors, right? So this is a need. The problem that companies have, and you pointed it out, telephone companies saying we'll give you a free cell phone if you give us the data, that has not traditionally worked out well. 3 years ago, AT&T had Gigapower. They were rolling out. It was $100 a month for the highest speed internet you could get. They were going to knock it down to $70 if you opted in to their ability to use your data. And the Wall Street Journal published an article. It's still out there giving them a black eye, saying AT&T charges $30 for privacy. Right? That's the way they spun it. They went the opposite way with it, and it gave these companies a black eye. So they're falling all over themselves trying to find a positive opt-in messaging. And so far, the only one that actually works is like the Privacy Co-op and other authorized agencies that can license the use of data for them, get a third-party nonprofit involved, and get members to actually have dividends. That, once you're able to put up our own terms and conditions to their reciprocal notice and consent, that's the only solution that makes sense in the business world right now.
Yeah, Dan, I want to go to you. You were the Associate Dean of the University of South Dakota School of Law. Was data privacy, data genocide, and that a topic in law school when you were Associate Dean at University of South Dakota?
Not in those days. It certainly would be now. It's a hot topic now, obviously, because of the privacy concerns and the abuse that we've seen in both in the private sector and in government. It's amazing the ways that advertisers and others are abusing the data to push advertising and other things to people. I mean, there really is no privacy. The truth is that, I've been a military officer for decades. Truth is, we've never really had privacy. In all the time that I've been involved and understand that the apparatus of the security ability of the United States and their ability to eavesdrop and to gather data, there's never been any privacy, not really. They've just gotten a little better at it. I mean, they've built this big site out here in Salt Lake City where they process terabytes of information daily. And all has to do with the communications that are involved in the United States. I mean, there's no secret about it. But it's incredibly abusive and incredibly abusive of our privacy rights and everything else. I mean, but there is no expectation of privacy anymore. I mean, the Supreme Court, if they say that there really isn't, because the government snoops and they snoop as much as they want in any manner that they want.
Yeah, if I can answer that briefly, I don't think privacy is dead. I think publicity law has been conflated with privacy to the point to where we think privacy is dead. But if you separate the four torts and you realize that, peeping Tom and publication of private facts are more of the privacy type torts, and then you look at the other torts like misappropriation and defamation of character, when we separate those things, those terabytes that you mentioned out in Utah, and actually it's petabytes, don't want to overcorrect here, that they're processing every day, 6 to 7 petabytes of data a day that they're processing. That is more on the publicity side. So people need to think, okay, they're taking your picture and they're putting it on a box of Wheaties and they're selling more cereal, and you're saying privacy is dead. That's not privacy, that's publicity. And you need a good agent. You need somebody like the Privacy Co-op to go and tell them to cease and desist using that data for secondary purposes until they license its use, right? So we're just applying good old-fashioned law to this solution, and that's the cure.
I'd like to tell a story, and this is a very strong argument for privacy is dead. So this happened within the last week or so. We had a family gathering, and we were talking about going to a climbing center that's local in Connecticut. And so we had a nice chat about it, called the Discovery Center. And then later in the day, maybe a few hours later, we were talking about a food supplement. It's not a very well-known food supplement at all. It's just a mix you make, and you've never heard of it, almost certainly. And then a few hours later, people started getting ads on their telephones for the Discovery Center and the food supplement based on our conversations. Is privacy dead?
No, that's it. You are making my point for me. So these applications that you install on your phone have notice and consent, and they tell you that they're going to use your microphone. Now, it might make sense that they're asking to use your microphone. In some cases, it doesn't, but you have to say yes to install it. What you want is first of all, you want to go through your phone, and in the privacy settings on both major platforms, there's an ability to see all the apps in one place that are accessing your microphone. And you can go through and say, I have some Stargazer app that doesn't need my microphone. Let me switch that off. When you start switching those off, that goes away. But our CTO at Privacy Co-op likes to tell a different story, and that is when he joined the Privacy Co-op years ago, he went through and he opted out of all companies using his data for secondary purposes, right? So we sent cease and desist orders to them on his behalf. That's what we do as his agent. And we tell them to stop using data for secondary purposes. And all of a sudden, he started seeing ads for things he was not interested at all. His favorite one to talk about is adult diapers. And he was like, why am I seeing ads for adult diapers? And other things that had absolutely no meaning to him whatsoever. And he's come around to the point to where he says, you know what? I'm okay if they license the use of my data to show something meaningful to me. But I don't want them doing it and cashing in without me getting a piece of the action. That's the licensing side of it.
Well, I would come back and say, look, first of all, I doubt anybody in my family said, sure, listen to our conversations, actively. Now, they may have indirectly because it was a, 3-page disclaimer and they didn't know. But it's a leaky boat. In other words, I have a boat and there's leaks everywhere. Amazon's trying to listen to me. My telephone's trying to listen to me. I have to opt in. I could be a consultant and spend hours and hours for each person saying, oh, I'm going to privatize you. It's probably a good business model. Call us up and for $50, we'll make sure you're private. But it's a leaky boat. There's data searches coming at you everywhere.
Let me give you some. That's an incredible statement. Private. If I could give you an answer to that might shock you. I think that there's some good news for you here. If you just think about this for a moment as a musician who creates a song, when they go into the studio and they sing into somebody else's microphone and it gets recorded on somebody else's deck and there's a publishing company involved, if they haven't signed a contract giving those rights to the song away to somebody like the Beatles famously did in their first album, or Billy Joel did with Piano Man, if they did not do that, if they did not give their rights away explicitly, they still own the rights to those songs. Now, in the exact same way, there's a thing called information rights. That's real, that's true. It's a right equivalent to ownership. It can be argued in the courts of law, and this is what we do every day at the Privacy Co-op. We say that Sam and Jill and Jody and Bob, they were out there generating all of this value on all of these platforms. They still own the rights to that information, and these companies admit it by having a privacy policy. That's a contract that sets forth your rights and says that you can opt out of their use of your data for secondary purposes. So the companies themselves are establishing that you have the right equivalent to ownership over the information that you generate and the data that you produce, right? So now you can go, that's why the cease and desist order is so effective. It's a single piece of paper that we say, hey, stop doing that until you license the use of that data. And it's a very effective business model.
So you're saying,
it doesn't, by the way, it's not $50.
You're saying I can go to the privacy co-op and for a fee, I guess?
No fee. You become a member in the co-op, right? So you buy a share in the co-op. It's a one-time purchase of $25. We don't really make money on that because if you ever quit, we have to give you your par value back. We have to buy back your share. That's not where the money comes into the model, right? It's you're buying a share in the co-op, and then you use our tools, and you find out that Toyota, and this is a true story, Toyota is selling your weight to your health insurance company. Every time you sit down on your car seat, it weighs you to decide whether it's going to deploy the airbags or not. They're selling your weight trends to your health insurance. When you come to our platform, you can read their privacy policy, see how we scored it, and say, make them stop in a single click. We send them a cease and desist order. And then Toyota turns right around and says, companies like Toyota turn around and say, hey, how can we license the use of this information? Well, you're going to get an opt-in if you sign this paper. Now we have reciprocal terms and conditions that we're putting forth to them. So it's a two-sided story at that point. It's good for consumers, and it's also good for business because they're getting an opt-in. That brings them within compliance with all those privacy regulations.
So let me ask you a question. Do I have to, when I go to your service, is it work that I have to say, Toyota's checking my weight and I want to cease and desist them? Because then it's the leaky boat, because everybody's spying on me all the time. My phone's spying on me, Amazon's spying on me, my internet companies are spying on me. I work with different, internet sites. I'm not, and personally, I don't care that much because I have no secrets really. It's like they could check my weight and everything, but I'm just saying, is there a way to universally opt out, or the government should certainly create it? Let me add that.
Well, the problem is that not everybody drives a Toyota. You might drive a Mercedes, somebody else drives a Land Rover. You need to go and look up the companies that you do business with. Now, we do try to help. You can type in, for example, FANG, that's FAANG, and you'll get Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, and you can go through and click them. But you have to keep in mind there's no way to universally do this because Apple may know you by a different identifier than Amazon does, right?
Well, that answers my question, but the problem then is, on this topic, it should be the government who should do this because your service is great, and I could see a lot of people going to it, so I'm not knocking it at all. Given current law, it's crazy what they're doing.
Let me tell you why.
I want to get Amazon off my phone, but let me add that what this calls for clearly is more government intervention. Because
I'm going to disagree with you.
Let me finish.
Oh, okay.
Because my point is, it's just like spam on telephones. They had created some layers where they weren't allowed to call you, and then they created more protection, and I still get spam calls, but the government is at least trying to universally protect us, at different levels, and telephone companies are trying to do it too. So I'm just saying that in the end, it's, piece by piece is good, but and your service is great, but so I'm not personally going to use it because I just don't care that much, and I don't have time to check every vendor I'm dealing with when it's a leaky boat. There's no privacy at all.
A couple of points here, if I may. First of all, on the governments around the world, the reason that we're not going to look for them to solve this problem is because they see tech and other industries that are faulting on data and privacy as a new cash cow. This is a new tax revenue for them. They call it privacy regulations. I'm using finger quotes here. But what they're really doing is a mixture of bribes and payoffs and taxation. Now, who are they taxing? Well, if you're spending half a day on Facebook generating value by creating all of this data, and Facebook is monetizing it, and the government's 128 of them come in and fine Facebook, knowingly and willingly, Facebook gladly pays these fines up. How is that not a tax indirectly levied on you? And tax lawyers will tell you it's not a tax, it's a taking, right? It's technically a taking. Okay. So you can't look to the governments to solve this problem, but let me make it easy on you. If you join the co-op, you don't have to opt out of anybody, right? You can just join the co-op to support our efforts, buy a membership, and at the end of the year, we pay out dividends. Where do those dividends come from? It comes from us negotiating with all of those companies and saying, if you're going to use the data of our members, you need to license its use. So they pay us, by the way, pennies on the dollar. It's a great deal for them versus facing all of those regulatory fines and taxation around the world. So they come in and say, we want your opt-in. By becoming a member of the privacy co-op, you're allowing us to manage that affirmative express consent for you. You don't have to do a thing. So you just become a member, sit back and relax, and we'll negotiate on your behalf.
I don't want to pursue too further, but what was the dividend on a $25 share?
Last year was $28.45. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it was more than the cost of membership, and it proved that the model worked. So we were very excited last November to send those checks out.
You're talking about dividends because that's something we're interested in, right, Sasha? And Sasha, also, I wanted to bring you in on, because the Honorable David M. Walker is going to be here later on, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and we're going to talk about security threats and cybersecurity. Now, that's back in your neck of the woods of Mother Russia, who I don't think cares really about data privacy at all. Not only that, they are developing ransomware and shipping it, and you can even get a commission by just buying it off the internet. So what's going on here, Sasha? Are we going to have to worry not only about legitimate companies taking our data, which they do every day, but people from Russia coming in and hacking our systems? And if we don't pay them, then your system is destroyed and you can't do anything.
Uh-oh.
Oh, Sasha, you're muted. Sasha, mute.
Okay. Now it's okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I believe that Russia just started its warm-up. Nothing terrible yet happened, and this warfare that Russia has created, it will be exponential in next several years. And essentially, this is a declaration of war. Let's not joke about it. Same as blockade of Berlin in 1948, it was a declaration of war. But at that time, U.S. had means to actually start the war, which it chose not to. Now, today, U.S. doesn't have a choice as to whether start the war or not. It's impossible. It's a mutual assured destruction. And there is no such thing as a phone call to say, would you please stop doing that? It's not nice, and so on. So U.S. now, Russia called its bluff. If U.S. believes that this is the strongest, and well, David Walker probably will better than me articulate what is the United States or so on. So Russia called its bluff. It has much more sophisticated armed forces. It has ability with a rocket which cost only $1 million to destroy, say, air carrier, which costs $2 billion, right? And it has a lot of sophisticated armaments that U.S. doesn't have yet today. It may have in a few years, but not today. So it's really, with all the internal problems that U.S. have and all these weaknesses that Russia is so skillfully being able to emphasize, put America in a very, very awkward position. It's very unclear, at least to me, what is the right response and what it should do.
Well, we'll go to Europe, and maybe Ben, you can help us out a little bit. What are we going to do about cybersecurity threats? I know that you're into impact investing and making sure that that the globe is protected from global warming and things of that nature, but what about the impact of cybersecurity that they go, well, we're just going to send a little ransomware into your computer system and affect frankly, all the business transactions in Europe as well as the United States, Ben?
Here I'll disagree a bit with Sasha, because I have been speaking on this topic because there is a lot of overlapping between impact investment and cybersecurity. I don't, number one, to start with, the cybersecurity issue is not something initially by Russia. China has been doing this since more than a decade, has been stealing, robbing, God knows what it has been doing with every information you can imagine from the West, including, for example, I don't know if you guys read, it was last week, Chinese, they penetrated Brussels, and apparently they have been copying out information from the European Union the last 2 years. They had completely penetrated the whole Brussels computer system. So Chinese are far greater threat than Russia is. Secondly, in cybersecurity, I look at it more as it's curious because one of my very old friend, he was the head of the cybersecurity of the United States. He was the advisor to the president. He used to say that cybersecurity is a poor man's war. It's if you have an army, which if you do not have the money to have a very expensive and powerful army like North Korea or something, then you use cybersecurity. And of course, what I think Peter and everybody else is saying, cybersecurity is a major, major threat to economy, to everything worldwide. But to link it with Russia being an aggressive partner, I would still have a big question mark on it, because I think Russia is no way economically or politically motivated to start any war anywhere. They will be severely, severely in disadvantage. So I think cybersecurity is a major pain in the neck, and the West has been neglecting it since a very, very long time. And that's why you need companies like Private Corp and all these companies to come up and protect the West. And West you have attacked from two sides. One is from internal and one is from external. External is from countries like China, Russia, North Korea. And internal is what Peter also mentioned, from major companies and industries who wants to steal your data. So I think the common citizen has to fight on both angles. I would pay more attention at this moment to internal than to the external, unless it really becomes what Sasha mentioned, the act of war, that Russians or Chinese, they really attack the Western infrastructure or do severe damage to it. Yes, then it is an act of war, and then there will be consequences. But as far as I'm aware of US has been playing a very long time defensive warfare, but under President Obama, US also changed its strategy, and US has the capacity to deflect a massive, massive damage if anybody would dare to touch its infrastructure. I don't know what happened under Trump, but US has the capacity.
Well, somebody already touched US infrastructure, number one. Number two, China is kind of a new theory, because about the meddling in US election in 2016, Russia and Donald Trump, they were trying to say that it was not Russian, it was Ukrainian people who meddled in security. So now, when Ukraine obviously is helpless victim of Russian aggression, so nobody is going to listen to this. So now China is quite convenient to start, but trust me, it's Russia basically. China just following the steps. It's convenient, especially when Russia does most of the damage, so the China does a little bit more, which will make Russia's damage even more spectacular. So they're acting actually together. I can agree with that, but Russia is a first violin and China is a fifth or sixth one. And the US now really must figure out really what to do. If it will be the symmetrical answer and US will try damage Russian infrastructure, first of all, it's very difficult to do because Russia has very little of infrastructure to begin with. So it's very difficult to identify, damage it. But even if US does it, then Russia will go to United Nations and say it's US aggression against us. Please, let's vote that the US has to stop immediately this aggression. And it will be the same thing what's going in UN with all Israel issues, when they have all the meeting after meeting and they're criticizing Israel and its aggression and so on. Does it work? Come on, you must be kidding. Israel is completely independent of all this garbage, and they just ignore it completely because they don't need nobody. They're a completely independent country. They don't need US, they don't need China or Russia or anybody else. They're a superpower in that region, and all the UN resolutions is absolute garbage.
I think calling Israel a superpower in that region may have been a true statement 20 years ago, but now it is not. Israel is very, very vulnerable
How
in
so?
many ways.
How so? Which way? Militarily?
Yes,
Who
militarily,
can
it's a
challenge?
very
Who
small
can
country.
challenge Israeli army except maybe U.S.? I see that's the only one force that can challenge Israeli, and not on Israeli soil. But if somewhere there would be a fight between Israel and U.S., I would put money that U.S. is stronger, and not in a blitzkrieg,
Well, you know what?
but on Israeli soil. Are you kidding? There were all army of all Arab countries 5 or 6 times were trying to conquer Israel, and
But
they all
Sasha, we are
failed
talking about
miserably.
30 years
Oh wait,
back.
first
We
let
are
me
But
throw
talking
today
30
something in
Israel
here.
years
is
back.
even
First of
stronger.
all,
Today
Today
it's not.
Israel is even stronger. Number
No,
two,
no, the side,
it's
the,
one politician actually mentioned, I forgot his name, that if 6 days war, which was in 1967, it would happen today, it would be 6 hours war, not days.
Yeah,
Sasha,
but
That's how much
Sasha,
Israel is
Sasha.
strong.
Sasha, I have a
Let me
little bit
throw
of
something
detail.
in. The real danger, first of all, to Israel is Iran is developing nuclear
Mhm.
weapons, and a nuclear weapon is going to possibly create a nuclear war in the Middle East if Israel finds out Iran has it and is going to use it. But a nuclear weapon for Iran in 5 years, 10 years, 2 years, could be devastating to Israel. But I have a different point, which is this has been my theory for a long time. But first of all, the U.S. really lost out when the Berlin Wall fell, and there was supposed to be a peace dividend with Russia, and things really haven't become, great comedy there. But you play a game called Risk, and probably all of you have played it, and it's a very well-known game around the world. And one of the really main theories is that if you get down to 3 big players, 3 powerful players, the one that wins is the one that allies with the other, and then the 2 fight it out. So between China, Russia, and the United States, which seem to be the most, they're very powerful militarily, it would be so beneficial if the United States would team up with Russia at some point. Now, Putin's getting older. Who knows what will happen in Russia? But there was a big dividend potentially when Trump was elected. But then the DNC basically there was a conspiracy theory that he was aligned with Russia, even though every of his policies was against Russia and hurt Russia. But that stopped Trump from being able to reach out to Russia. But hopefully somebody's going to reach out to Russia and say, look, why don't you reform a little bit? It would be better for you economically. We have a lot of common interests. China is not going to be of great aid to Russia in the long run because they're right next to each other. They already fight about borders. And if a super powerful China is not going to be in Russia's interest at all.
Yep.
So in the end, the United States should be reaching out further to Russia, either during Putin's life. Hopefully Putin will wake up and say, wait a minute, we could be an economic superpower if we would, become more capitalist, more free. But if he doesn't, he's not going to live forever. So hopefully the opportunity is for the United States to band with Russia over the years.
When you have a moment, just watch one more time the movie Independence Day. There is one episode that when U.S. president is asking that creature, what is it do you want? And the answer is, to kill you. Remember? That's what's happening when you will go and you will start talking to Russian. Maybe you will become a little bit nicer. Maybe you'll do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. To kill
Times
you.
change, though.
No.
The future can change.
For the last 1,000 years, it never changed from Ivan the Terrible to Peter the Great to
Wait, I was about to say
Stalin
Peter the Great. Wait a minute. Peter the Great was a perfect example. He forced Russia to move into the future, and he was known as a tyrant in some ways. But in other ways, he said, you know what? You're going to have to cut your beards or pay your beard tax. I'm going to take control, and we're going to move into a future because he wanted to make it more European. Well, you know what? Putin might say, or somebody might say in Russia, you know what? We need to advance. We want a better future for our people. And the way to do it is to open things up. And I'm just saying the United States could help that along by trying to create better relationships with Russia, as Trump might have done, except for the conspiracy theory. And we lost that opportunity, but who knows what will happen in the next decade.
So you propose that Putin will tell to his people that I'm going to give you a better future. So their present is not that great. Do you expect really Putin to say that? Absolutely not. Russia
No,
is
he
the
wouldn't say it
greatest
that
country,
way.
it's the strongest country, it's the biggest country, and it has to conquer the world. That's what Mr. Putin will tell their people.
Listen, Putin would be the most popular president ever in Russia, maybe if he started reforming things.
Oh,
He said,
there
you know
was
what?
one. Mr.
It's
Gorbachev. He
possible.
was a
I'm
great
not saying he will. I'm
reformer.
saying it's possible.
No, Gorbachev was a great reformer. Do you know that all Russian people hate him passionately because he was the one under whom Soviet Union ceased to exist? Okay, so if Putin will do the same thing what Gorbachev did, then not Soviet Union, but Russian Federation will cease to exist. 100%.
Because he's trained the people to hate the American people.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the propaganda. It's sort of like the same thing with the North Koreans, right? They haven't got a pot to piss in, and yet they're developing nuclear weapons and trying to disrupt their stuff and trying to disrupt things. And it's only because he's trying to stay in power. And how does he stay in power? By inciting fear in the people. That's the same trick that the Chinese use, the CCP, the Russians have used, the doctrination. That's the only way communism lasted as long as they did, is through a theory of fear and intimidation and false information.
And also they need an external enemy for their people to really
that's right.
This propaganda. This is U.S. is perfect. It's number one. It's enemy. It's fantastic enemy. It's big, rich, strong. So what could be better enemies than United
China.
States?
All right. The great Satan.
China
If things back to the risk theory, it could be China instead of the United States.
Okay, so China is a rich country, it's a populous country and so on, but it's not nearly as prestigious as the United States. David, would you agree with me?
Yes, we've been joined by the Honorable David M. Walker, who's the author of America in 2040, Still a Superpower. He was the former Comptroller General of the United States of America. David, welcome to the show. And we were discussing, obviously, America still a superpower? Is Russia a real threat to the United States? I don't know. Did you ever meet with Putin or any of the people from Russia when you were the Comptroller General?
I didn't meet personally with Putin, but I did attend the Bolshoi Ballet in Putin's presidential box with a 5-course dinner, and they did intermission while we were changing courses with the president of the Chamber of Audit for the Russian Federation, who was my counterpart to Comptroller General of the United States position here in the United States. And I had very good relations, not only with the Russians, but also with my Chinese counterpart.
David, was it Mr. Stepashin in Russia?
Yeah, it was Stepashin. Sergei Stepashin. Sergei Stepashin's a friend of mine, and I don't know what's happened to him, but I know he's no longer in that position.
Maybe he retired.
Yeah, I think he did retire. His wife was a prominent banker at the time. But let me just comment on a couple of things that I heard. First, I don't think that Russia is a superpower in the definition that I posit in the book, because it's not a global economic power and it doesn't have global cultural influence. It is a military power, although a declining military power, with the big footnote of the fact that it's got the largest nuclear weapons arsenal of any country on Earth, including the United States. And it is trying to develop new weaponry, if you will, with the budget that it has. But it's and it's not a global diplomatic power anymore. It used to be a global diplomatic power, but it's not. China has really stepped in that position, is taken over for Russia. I do believe that Putin is a strong man. I do believe that Putin wants to reconstitute the former Soviet Union. I believe that. And authoritarian regimes normally try to be strong persons, and they also try to instill fear in the people, and they want to have somebody that people need to fear. And quite frankly, I'll say something that may be a little bit controversial, but I think our own government tried to do that with COVID-19. I think when people can instill fear into people, they can make arguments for bigger government, stronger government, more intervention, less individual rights. So I think China is, if not already a superpower based on the 4 definitions, is imminent. But I do think that China and Russia and North Korea and Iran and Venezuela are aligning against U.S. interests. And I do think that the greatest threat to the United States is not on the outside, it's on the inside. And the greatest domain threat that we face is cyber, by far, which is complicated by the fact that, you may have nation states behind it. They may not be behind it, but they may harbor third-party actors that are behind it. And it's one thing when a nation state or a rogue group attacks you and you know that they attacked you. All right. It's another thing when they use cyber in order to disrupt things, which could have serious adverse economic and other implications. But you really can't pin it on a nation state.
Yeah. Hey, David, I've got a question for you, if I may, on that topic. And it's a pretty straightforward to your book. I've got up behind me the definition. This is the Westphalian definition of a nation state, right? Permanent population, defined territory, one leadership, capacity for relations, independent, and it's whether it's recognized or not. You don't have to recognize a nation state in order for it to be sovereign, right? Our question at the Privacy Co-op we've been asking of late, and we're getting some really amazing answers from sociologists and economists alike, and that is, are FANG, that's Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, are they now behaving as sovereigns? Do they see themselves as sovereigns? And when you think about it, the defined territory, if you go to www.facebook.com, there's nobody else that can exist in that territory. And they have a permanent population of 2 billion people. So, I don't know another country that has a permanent population of 2 billion people. So if they tick off all the elements of a sovereign, my question to you is, do they also tick off all the check boxes for a superpower that you just listed?
They don't have global military power, so no, they don't have that. I could debate whether they have global diplomatic influence. They have global influence. There's no question about that. They have global cultural impact. I think there's no question about that. And they have global economic impact. But I don't think they definitely don't hit the military. Okay,
that's interesting. And by the way, you said the diplomatic. The way Google and Facebook deal with Australia is completely different than the way that they deal with China. And most famously, recently, Australia tried to pass some laws that says if you're going to scrape our news agencies and monetize that data, you need to pay something like a royalty to our news agencies. They were playing around with what that legislation looked like, and Google made a very public spectacle video to all the population of Australia and said, if your government does this, we're going to pull our search engine from your entire country. And if you're a mother who has a child that's about to die and you try to Google a solution, you're not going to get an answer. And Australia caved to that. So I think they definitely have that ability or capacity to carve out unique relationships country by country.
Yeah, they totally have a cultural impact. Okay. I mean, when I say diplomatic, I mean formal diplomatic relations, which obviously they don't have, but they have huge cultural impact and they have huge economic impact. No question.
Cool. Thank you.
I would like to mention, Jay, to what you just said, is that the traditional measurements of what you just implied make a sovereign, I don't think this is applicable to this giant like Google and Facebook and so on. It's a new phenomenon. They are like a quasi-independent country in some ways, not physically, not militarily, and not diplomatically probably, but they exert enormous power. It's a new phenomena, and I'm not prepared to either criticize it or be sort of dancing with joy because of their successes. It's a really new phenomenon, and I'm not sure what's the best way.
Dancing with wolves.
Yeah.
There was a tax that is being proposed and was, I believe, approved this weekend, roughly, in the EU, that they're going to go along with Biden's suggestion that there would be a 15% international tax minimum on tech companies. So that's not a country where you're taxed. And I don't know if it'll go through or not. There's debates back and forth, but they don't have a power to tax. Yes, they can charge you what they want, but they have competition in that, and they can't just charge whatever they want. But a country can tax, and they're the ones getting taxed. So I think they have inordinate power. I think there should be some checks, and I think there will be, hopefully, on their influence, as you said, David. It's incredible, the influence, and the United States is polluted. For them to ban certain speech and still have protection, eventually that will stop when the right people get in power, because it's crazy situation.
3 quick comments. One, the G7 agreed to that, but there are a lot more than 7 countries in the world. And even if the G20 agrees to it, there's a lot more than 20 countries in the world. All right. So I personally think that there's merit to some type of a minimum corporate tax, but there are all kinds of implementation problems associated with that. Okay. Secondly, for the interest of full and fair disclosure, my son works for Google, but he's a good guy, Thirdly, I do think they need more regulation. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Yeah, you know what? I think they can influence the tax if they want, but there has to be an agreement, and it could even hurt the United States. By the way, there's debate back and forth, because then they might move towards 15% countries. But here's the thing: whether they're operating in a small country or a big company, if the United States or the EU says, "Look, you are going to pay 15% somewhere, or you're not going to operate in our country," they're going to pay it somewhere. That it's not that hard to implement. That's because they're not really countries. They act in some ways like them, but they don't have that kind of power. So
yeah, but they don't run deficits, and they don't have a huge debt. The last time these supernatural countries. Ben, since you had the Swiss Impact Investment Association over there, do you get people from Russia to participate in impact investing? Any organizations in Russia that participate in that?
Yes. It has become a very it's still not so much well covered in the media, but there's a lot happening on the social and environmental side in Russia. A lot of businesses, small businesses, middle businesses, who are doing amazing work on the social projects, on environmental projects all around Russia. So we are financing them. We are also educating them, because we have the expertise. And it's also the other way around. They also have expertise. They also have knowledge which we do not have. For example, if you, I think the previous time also I mentioned their Arctic research institutes. The Russians they have so much data. They are so much advanced in the last 40, 50 years they have, which the Western world doesn't have. So they share that knowledge and information with us. So on climate change and things like that, there is a lot going on. And now Russia has even put forward some, President Putin has put forward some people as leading the impact investment and leading the social investment side. So it is moving, it is developing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Are you doing another international conference in like September or October?
Yeah.
I know that COVID slowed everything down last year, but are you putting together international?
Yeah. In November we are doing it, and it will be more with governments. So a lot of Swiss governments and Swiss, because we are also there's a lot of regulatory changes going on in the European Union, especially on the field of impact investment and sustainable investment. And we are trying to mirror that in Switzerland. So we are with a lot of countries to support the governments and to create more and more rules and regulations, because these regulations are kicking in everywhere, from the Nordics to Spain to France, England, everywhere regulations are kicking in. So it is becoming very strict. So for us, it is extremely good, because everything we are putting forward is being accepted. Today also we had a board meeting from CLC. So we are putting forward a lot of also rules in financial taxonomy on agriculture investments. So these are going through. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot happening here.
Yeah. David, what's happening with our European allies? Are we still friendly with Europe, or are we alienate Europe? I mean, where do we stand with our European allies today?
Well, I think, the new administration is trying to re-engage on a multilateral basis with regard to our allies. In some ways, that's a very positive thing. Trump would like to do more bilateral things rather than multilateral things because he thought we had more leverage that way. Trump also was pretty bombastic, and especially with regard to issues like NATO burden sharing, which is a legitimate issue, but how you go about it matters. But some of the things that Biden's doing are very controversial. I mean, for example, the Iran nuclear agreement, whether or not he wants to try to enter that without major revisions to it, authorizing removing the sanctions on completing the pipeline from Russia to Germany is something that he did that is very controversial. At the same point in time, he closed down the Keystone pipeline in the United States. And then when we had the cyber attack on the Colonial pipeline, even his own cabinet secretary said the safest way to transport energy is a pipeline. So, it's also the most environmentally friendly. So, we are re-engaging our allies. I think that's a good thing. But I also think that we have to keep in mind that we need to know what's in our collective best interest without ignoring the domestic implications of some of these issues. Like, for example, we were energy independent, which has significant economic and national security implications. We really don't want to lose that, but the current administration's policies are putting us in danger of losing that again.
Yeah.
It's incredible level of hypocrisy that is being shown by the Biden administration as creating tremendously ill effects on our own economy and our own people. The American people should know that and stand up to it.
Sasha, before I forget about it, you mentioned Sergei Stepashin.
Yes.
Do you see this right behind me here over my right shoulder?
Yeah.
That's from Russia, and it was given to me by Sergei Stepashin.
Okay. Yes, I would like to address what you just said and something what Ben said earlier about Russian companies participating in impact investment. I would like to make very clear difference between majority of Russian people and majority, probably I would say so, majority of Russian companies, especially young developing high-tech companies, and action of Russian government and Russian government agencies and so on. Don't mix it all in the same bag, because the Russian policy of top people in the government of Russia is, when I say the major rule of any investment is preservation of capital. So their rule is preservation of power. So regardless what's happened, they must preserve the power. That's why they need to indoctrinate these people who are working there from 9 to 5 or 6 to 11 or all night and all day. But that doesn't matter. They have to indoctrinate these people so they will know that the Russia is surrounded by enemies, and U.S. is the commander of the enemies, and we must be ready to fight with enemies. So the normal Russian people who have some brains left, and this and the companies that you, Ben, mentioned earlier, I hope they are immune to this nonsense, and that's a pleasure to deal with them. They're very intelligent people, but not the Russian.
I'd like to bring up a point of news that is interesting, because when you're looking at superpowers in 2040 and 2050, the projections are China #1, India #2 economically. That doesn't mean per person, per capita. But the interesting thing is, over the weekend or recently, China said we're going to get rid of our 2 children per woman policy, and they went to 3. But this is because for a long time they said we're going to only allow you to have 1 child. I mean, it's unbelievable, but that's what, and I understand why. There's 1.5 billion people, so I guess there's too many people. But but it shows you how things backfire, because they went from 1 to 2. Now they're saying 3. Their fertility rate for these women is 1.2, and they need it to be 1.8. And what's interesting too is that a lot of, when they went to 1, a lot of Chinese aborted females, unfortunately, and because they said, if I'm going to have 1 child, I want a son, for philosophical reasons, for economic reasons. So there's a shortage of women in China. So when you look at 2040 and you say the whole world has a huge problem on unfunded liabilities for medical care. I look today at Social Security funding, pension funding for the whole world, and all the countries are really bad. China was about 46% in one study. India, number 2 economically, supposedly, by projection in 2040, was about 56, and U.S. about 60% integrity. And Europe and everybody else, they're all, low. Maybe Europe's in the 50s and 60s, depends on the country, South America. But so all the world has this problem. But China, first of all, has a huge problem, because they have this gigantic demographic bomb that's going off, where they already have a major proportion of people that are over 60. It's growing, and they're going to have a huge problem, which could this whole thing could shake up the whole world, and probably will. And it has also economic implications, which I have to throw in there, because for the investor, where if rates are almost certainly going to go to 0 worldwide, because every country is going to be printing money and they're not going to want to pay interest on it.
There's a solution to that.
But China's got major issues in terms of the future, as the world does.
There's a solution to that, Peter.
What's that?
They just released another virus that targets the elderly.
Yeah, that won't be
It
popular
kills millions
again.
of people, like the last one did in China.
Right.
Yeah, let me mention that the United States only has a birth rate of about 2.1, which is basically steady population. China's got a much worse problem than we do, but then again, we don't have near the population they do, and we've got comparable territory that they have. The only reason the United States is growing is because of immigration. But there's a big difference between legal and illegal immigration, and there's a big difference between skilled immigrants and non-skilled immigrants, if you will. The largest single problem for governments, both domestically and internationally, are huge unfunded retirement obligations, pensions, and healthcare. That's the ticking time bomb, and ultimately we're all going to have to come to grips with.
Mm-hmm. And that's also a time bomb that they don't want to address, and we're getting close to the hour, so the thing is, we're going to leave it at that. We do like to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, and for those people who have not read his book, get this one, America in 2040, Still a Superpower, the former Comptroller General of the United States of America. And we have some very, very serious issues that we have to address here relating to the debt. And we'll see you next week on economics.